Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video I'm going to be showcasing an amazing climbing team for the Master Premier Cup that I had all positive sets with. The team is built around Skeledirge. Skeledirge has an ability to break a ton of cores, and Skeledirge itself forms a nearly perfect core with Florges, as Florges can do well basically against anything that isn't a steel type, and you better believe Skeledirge can incinerate through those steel types. For the save switch, I'm running the trusty Best Buddy Snorlax, as it's just incredibly consistent neutrally. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and let's take a look at the team in action. Hopping into the first match, we've got a dominant lead Skeledirge versus Florges. Opponent save switches into Goodra, and I have an amazing response available with my own Florges. This is something that I was noticing throughout the day, is a lot of people were using Goodra as a save switch, and Goodra is a very effective save switch. So I really wanted to make sure that I was well prepared for the Goodra save switch, and having a Florges in the back really helped me feel very strong against those Goodra save switch teams. Goodra is going to fire off another Thunder Punch, so they are running Thunder Punch Draco Meteor. Opponent is going to send in their own Florges. I'm going to farm up to 100 and then fire off the Moonblast. They will have to throw energy here because I can potentially make it to another Moonblast. I am able to get there, and this just KOs if they let it through. Opponent is just going to let it through. In the back is Annihilate, and this is actually a team that I myself featured. Now this team that my opponent's running is a very strong team, but its big area of concern is going to be the Skeledirge lead. From here, even if I do get double baited, I should still be in a winning position as I still have a full health Snorlax in the back. I shield, and I get the shield call right. It's the Shadow Ball. I can fire off the Disarming Voice. Opponent no shields, but that's still not going to be enough to save them, so they will resign the match. In the next match, going up against fellow content creator Hildeclash, and I get another amazing lead, Skeledirge versus Florges once again. He save switches into an Excadrill, so he is actually ABA weak to the Skeledirge. This is incredibly good for me. I will shield up the Drill Run, fire off the Shadow Ball. If he shields, I can just switch into Snorlax and farm him all the way down. If he no shields, then I can just pivot into Snorlax later. So either way, I'm in a pretty nice position. I'm going to send in the Snorlax. I can tank 2 Drill Runs perfectly fine, because again, Snorlax is just massively bulky. And then I'm just going to farm all the way down. This way, I exit with quite a lot of energy, and I do help the switch clocks get slightly closer to back in alignment. In comes the Florges. I can start spamming out these body slams, just trying to get as much damage as I possibly can. Throwing 3 licks, firing off this move just before the Disarming Voice will be reached. So body slam is going to connect. Now Snorlax here, able to make a 3rd body slam, getting so much value out of the Snorlax, saving a bunch of energy on that Florges. In the back, it's Dragon Breath Gyarados, and again, if it's something that the Skeledirge can't do well against, Florges will have a good matchup. Like Dragon Breath or Waterfall Gyarados, Florges does quite well into both. And this is the Dragon Breath variant, which means they just have 0 fast move pressure, so now I have a very safe play of just spamming up Disarming Voices. He's going to call it, which is a pretty nice call, but realistically, I just need damage on this thing. And now it's in a range where, worst case scenario, I can knock it out with a move from Skeledirge. So I will fire off the Moonblast, just looking to pick up the KO or grab the final shield. He will commit the shield, so now I go for the Disarming Voice. This is not enough to knock out, but from here, I can just aggressively switch into the Skeledirge and shield once. In comes the Florges. Florges firing off energy, but I'm going to get to leave with a charge attack loaded for the Gyarados, so I will be able to take the win. So a bit unfortunate there. That game was very alignment dependent, with Skeledirge kind of core breaking on the lead, but that's the power of Skeledirge, is it can do a lot of core breaking. Speaking of core breaking, oh my goodness, Skeledirge versus Rhyperior, this is a terrible matchup. I'm going to save switch into the Snorlax, and I decide to bluff like I have superpower. I don't think this is a good play. People are just not expecting you to run superpower. I tried bluffing this a couple times with different teams I was running, and no one was falling for it, so I would just say hold on to your energy. In comes Goodra. Goodra does not let me make the Outrage. Very good counting there from my opponent. They will go for the Aqua Tail. It barely does not KO. I try and click the Outrage, but unfortunately it is not to be. In comes my Florges, and Florges is going to have to put in a lot of work here. I'm going to no-shield the Aqua Tail, look to overfarm substantially, and then go for the Moonblast to pick up the KO, since Goodra does have quite a bit of bulk to it. Moonblast knocks out the Goodra. I'm hoping that they send in the Rhyperior, and they do. So it looks like they are now actually a little bit core broken by the Florges. I full send the Moonblast, they shield, and this is going to be very tricky. Do I call the Breaking Swipe? I think about it, but I shield, and I get it right. It's the Rock Wrecker. I can't make 2 more Moonblasts. My only hope is a Disarming Voice bait, so I will go for the bait. If he calls it, it's over, but they shield. And now I make it to the Moonblast. Is this going to be enough to knock out? I think the answer is no. Rhyperior is very bulky, but I can send in the Skeledirge and commit the shield on the Rock Wrecker, and then I have Skeledirge energy versus what they have in the back. My opponent reads the shield, goes for the Breaking Swipe, gets the debuff, and that loses me the game. A horrible hard counter lead, but it came down to a 50-50 there. And as we see, due to the debuff, I'm not going to be able to KO. Whereas without the debuff, 2 Disarming Voices or a Disarming Voice plus a Shadow Ball would have been enough to knock out. But unfortunately here, the Disarming Voices get close to KOing, but just not quite enough. We've got a surprise in the lead in the next match. Skeledirge versus not the Hisuian Avalugg, but the OG Avalugg. At first glance, I was remembering that this thing runs like Icy Wind and Body Slam, but looking it up after the fact, it can actually run Crunch and Earthquake as well. So it does actually have some coverage moves for the Skeledirge. So I confidently no-shield, thinking that there's not a possible coverage move. It turns out there is one, but they do end up going for the Icy Wind. Unsure if that was just a bait or what they ended up throwing. Regardless, I get a farm down winning switch and a shield. In comes Waterfall Gyarados, and this is just the easiest pivot ever. Because I have the Best Buddy Snorlax, I am going to be beating all non-Best Buddy Gyarados, and they don't have the Best Buddy boost equipped. So I can spam out the Body Slams, and the lick damage just shreds through Gyarados when you have that 15 attack Best Buddy Snorlax. It's absolutely amazing. They go for the Outrage. Outrage will do some substantial damage, but I can still survive it, and that's just the wonderful thing about Snorlax. Snorlax is just the glue that can hold so many teams together. At this point, I don't have to shield the Snorlax. It doesn't matter what they have in the back, anything in the format, and I just win. So I can bring in the Florges. If it beats the Florges, it's not going to be beating the Skeledirge. Opponent will resign the match. We move to game number 5. We have the Battle of Fire Ghost types, Skeledirge versus Chandelure. This is actually a little bit awkward because I cannot have Chandelure going up against Florges. I have a tough call to make. Shadow Ball or Flame Charge. Call the bait. It's the Flame Charge. And that's an absolutely massive, massive bait call, as now I'm firmly in the driver's seat. My bait is actually successful. I'm going to continue to farm. I don't want to go for CMP because if my opponent decides to no shield for whatever reason, I do want to have residual energy. So I farm up a ton. I wait a couple turns to make sure they don't catch on something like a Snorlax. They call it, and the Shadow Ball picks up the knockout. In comes Gyarados. I'm going to bank a Shadow Ball for later. And again, once I win that lead matchup, if they send in something like a Gyarados, I'm always going to be pivoting out. Because I know Skeledirge's energy is very valuable. And in the back, opponent has their own Florges. So pivoting out ends up being a very worthwhile thing. Because now the Skeledirge energy will be very valuable against the Florges. There, I try and throw one lick in the move. Again, could have been operator error, could have been game bad, but I do end up throwing on alignment, which is, oh man, it just hurts to watch back. It absolutely does. I go for another Body Slam. I'm trying to make it to another one. The game stutters quite a bit. That one, I'm pretty confident it was game bad, but realistically, I don't need that energy. Here, I get greedy. I shouldn't have ended up throwing the Incinerate. I could have just clicked the Disarming Voice, but I wanted to go for good timing. My opponent should switch here, and they do, so I can fire off the Disarming Voice at the Gyarados. Gyarados ends up shielding, and now we just have a guaranteed win condition by switching into the Florges. It would be unwise to stay in with the Skeledirge and risk potentially getting Dragon Breath down. By switching into the Florges, I can just guarantee that they won't ever have a massive energy advantage, so I'll just be in a very comfortable spot. Moonblast is going to get them deep into the red. Could have probably gone double Disarming Voice, but I wanted to just guarantee damage on this Pokemon, and now I can look to overfarm with the Florges. So I can farm up 4, fire off the Disarming Voice. That is going to be able to knock out, and then my opponent can bring back in their own Florges, but I'm just able to outpace. I make the Disarming Voice, it's going to knock them out, and we're able to take a 4-1 set in our first set with the team. We move to set number 2, Skeledirge versus Rhyperior. Terrible lead. Last Rhyperior lead, I lost, so this time I am looking to play better. This time my opponent ends up banking a Breaking Swipe for later and sending Florges into my Snorlax. Now this is quite interesting, because by not throwing the energy, they've now given me the ability to fight for Switch. However, I don't really think Switch advantage helps me a ton in this game, as Rhyperior with energy is still incredibly threatening, especially if they're able to farm me down. So they are going to fire off the Moonblast, that will connect. I'm farming up with the Snorlax. My opponent will go for the Disarming Voice, And now I think I'm just going to keep farming. If they let me get to 2, I'll throw it, but I'm actually just going to let this go. I don't want switch advantage. Rather, I want energy on Skeledirge. I'm going to get 2 free incinerates. They're only on 4, so I can outpace them here. They throw a move, and this cannot be a rock wrecker. It's only 5, so I can no shield this. And then I'm just going to bank the move, send in Florges, and it's Togekiss in the back. Florges absolutely crushes Togekiss, but if Togekiss has 2 shields, then the matchup is a lot more difficult. I'm going to spam out Disarming Voice after Disarming Voice because 1 Moonblast will not be enough to knock out, so it's just an inefficient move to ever throw. They are going to double shield, and that's perfectly fine. They end up throwing on Alignment, which does give me an extra Fairy Wind, and this is something that I can take advantage of. I'm going to look to massively overfarm and go for the Disarming Voice. My goal here is going to be to throw 1 Fairy Wind, bank the Moonblast, and snipe with the Shadow Ball. I've saved the Moonblast. I can use this energy versus the Rhyperior. I knock out the Togekiss, and in comes Rhyperior. Rhyperior does have enough for the Rock Wrecker, but they're going to fish for the debuff. I let it through. It's the Breaking Swipe. It does not debuff, but even with the debuff, we have a guaranteed win condition because I have Moonblast loaded on my Florges and a shield, so they can't even CMP and knock me out. Despite near impossible odds in that game, with perfect energy management, I'm able to fight back and take the win. Bit of an awkward lead in the next match, leading Skeledirge versus Sui Avalugg. If I'm able to correctly no-shield an Icy Wind or shield a Rock Slide, I'm in a pretty good spot, but I call the bait and it's the Rock Slide. That's really unfortunate. Now, my opponent can probably just fire off an Icy Wind and then farm down eventually. So my plan here is I'm just going to let this go. Fully expecting the Icy Wind. Opponent Rock Slides again, this trainer refusing to bait, and that's not ideal. I send in the Snorlax, they send in Goodra, and now I bank energy and I go into my Florges. Florges can tank a bunch of Aqua Tails. I can knock out with a Moonblast and try and sweep at the Florges, but they have Sludge Wave on the Goodra. Disaster strikes, and now this is just an instantly lost game. The reason why is because they are just going to use their final shield on the Avalugg and debuff my Snorlax again and again and again. Oh man, in hindsight, I think I should have just stayed in with the Snorlax versus the Goodra and then tried to sweep with Florges in the endgame, because Goodra save switches are basically always trying to bait out a potential fairy type. So it's going to be something like a Dragonite, a Gyarados, or an Annihilape in the back, all of which Florges would have been very good against. Now, I do decide to commit a shield, but I'm at -2. There's the Annihilape. I no longer have my Florges, and I will resign the match. We've got a great lead in the next match, Skeledirge versus Excadrill. Excadrill, if shields are down, can deal some significant damage, but with shields up, it just gets absolutely cooked. So I'm going to shield this, throw 1 more Incinerate, and then go for the Shadow Ball, but they switch out into Goodra. Last time, I brought my Florges into the Goodra save switch, and honestly, I didn't really like how that game went, so I'm going to make an important adjustment here. I'm going to go for the Disarming Voice, followed by the Shadow Ball, and then I'm going to bring in Snorlax. So I'm predicting that Florges will be valuable in the back, and so I'm bringing Snorlax into the Goodra. Goodra will fire off the Aqua Tail. They can make another one. That's very okay by me. I'm going to exit with quite a lot of energy. Now, I don't have superpower for the Excadrill, but the Excadrill does not know that, as I have not revealed my moveset. So if they bring in the Exca, then I can just fire off a Body Slam, and they honestly might decide that they want to actually commit the shield here. So I will fire off the Body Slam, and it works. They end up committing the shield. They throw instantly, which is pretty nice for me, as they will fire off the Drill Run. It does not KO. In the back, it's Dragonite, and since we didn't fall for that bait out, Florges just gets to absolutely shred Dragonite. Moonblast won't quite KO, but it leaves its mark, nearly picking up that one-hit KO. Dragonite makes the last-second superpower, but it does not matter. In comes the Excadrill, and there's just no winning this for my opponent. At this point, they can just resign the match. Opponent is insistent on playing it out. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I don't have to shield this. I can just send in the Skeledirge. I think this is a range where 1 Incinerate should come pretty close to KOing. So I will send in the Skeledirge. Oh, the Incinerate leaves him on 1 HP. So I'm saying, you know what? I'm still not using my shield. I'm just going to farm down with 1 lick from the Snorlax and take the victory. Hopping into the final match, Skeledirge versus Ursaluna. Pretty nice matchup for the Skeledirge as long as you have shields. Opponent safe switches to Golisopod, and I have an amazing response available with Snorlax. Snorlax, just due to the fact that Golisopod doesn't have any fast move pressure here, is a very good check. And I do get a little bit of good luck. My opponent's first liquidation does not debuff. Body Slam is going to connect. Opponent will fire off a second liquidation. And again, I'm not going to be shielding anything in this matchup. This liquidation does get the debuff, and that does make things a little bit complicated. However, I still think with the debuff that I can survive another liquidation. They're going to commit the shield, so my opponent is really trying to make a play for switch. So they're going to have something good against my Skeledirge in the back. But look at the Snorlax putting the team on his back, withstanding 3 liquidations, even after the second one did get the debuff. Golisopod unable to farm down either. That double resist on Shadow Claw just so valuable. I'm going to set in the Skeledirge. Even if they do make it to the liquidation, that's fine by me. At this point, I had lost count. They only end up making it to an Aerial Ace, which is fine. And in the back, there's Gyarados. I go for the Shadow Ball. I was a little worried that there would be a catch onto the Ursaluna, but even so, I'm just in a winning position because I can send in the Florges. Opponent sends in the Ursaluna, and Florges with a 2 shield advantage with only neutral matchups just cannot lose that endgame. All in all, I had a ton of fun getting to run this team. Skeledirge is an absolute menace in this format, which is honestly a bit of a surprise considering it only gets to about 3,400 combat power. But it's just a terrific core breaker against a lot of teams. As in the Great League and the Ultra League, its coverage is part of what can help it be so absurdly strong. Its coverage is basically walled in 0 matchups, like that offensive triangle of Ghost, Fire, and Fairy. Basically, only unless you run into a Master League Pyroar are you not going to be able to at least do neutral damage. So, and I have yet to see a Master League Pyroar, so I think it's pretty unlikely. And that pairing with Florges is just absolutely incredible. Florges is incredibly good neutrally, and so good into everything that isn't like an opposing Skeledirge or a Steel type, and that's what we have Skeledirge for. And then that Snorlax, again, I can't state enough how important that best buddy is on the Snorlax, especially if you're leading something that is weak to Gyarados, because being able to control that Gyarados matchup as the Snorlax is very valuable, whereas if you don't have that best buddy, then that matchup actually does favor the Gyarados. And even though this Skeledirge Florges core is a very powerful one, not being able to dictate switch advantage with it can definitely make it struggle if you end up losing switch. And then let's say your Florges gets stuck on a Steel type like Metagross. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you as always to our members here on YouTube. The support guys provide is sincerely appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.